This is my no damage challenge run breakdown through all of the main stages in Sonic and the Secret Rings. I know people tend to like watching runs without any commentary breaks, so I dropped this video separately alongside the run itself for those people. And then, for people like you who like to hear the breakdown and discussion, I have this video also up for you. If you want to watch the run first, go ahead and click the card up top and then come back to this one. We're just going to tackle how I did my runs, but this is also a discussion, so feel free to leave tips for others in the comments or share how you've done your challenge run of this game in the past, because that would be really neat to see. With that being said, let's go ahead and start with Sand Oasis. Sand Oasis is not a difficult stage by any means, which makes sense as it's the first proper stage in the game after the Lost Prologue, which in itself is just a glorified tutorial, and no, I'm not playing any of those levels. Despite that being the case, Sand Oasis presents a couple of challenges that someone who is trying to complete it in a fancy manner may run into. First of all, there are these boxes and jars littered in a few places throughout the stage. The most satisfying thing for me is to be able to crash into them while keeping up the pace. However, the props themselves can be inconsistent to deal with when considering collision. Sometimes you can just run through them with no problem, but other times they either won't break or they break but still slow your pace. And this in itself isn't a huge issue, it's just that when you have a route planned with inconsistent variables, it makes it iffy as to whether or not you'll want to incorporate it into your run. As for me, I did both. I couldn't let go of how cool it looks for Sonic to slide through these boxes and hit the spring, so I tried my best to get that every time. I found it more consistent to slide into the boxes just before I hit them in order to pull it off. But the other few times didn't matter as much to me, so I jumped over them entirely. It just personally depends on how you'd like to go about it, to be honest. The other issue I ran into had to do with this specific portion of the stage. As Sonic runs across here, the floor lowers, and that can sometimes spell bad news because you're likely to already be moving at fast speeds here, leading you to having to get your footing after the floor is essentially pulled from underneath you. I ultimately went for charging a jump near these jars and preparing for a short jump afterwards in order to keep up the pace. You can land a charge jump before that, but it just feels a tad slower. Now, I didn't take advantage of any of the fancy tech in this stage, but here are the skills I have equipped and what I'll be using for the rest of the stages. Of course, I have all of the skills that increase speed and movement, but for the rest, I decided to primarily go with skills that align under the Crest of Wind skill. I'm sure you can guess as to why that may be, but I also think the gusts of wind look cool and really capture the kind of energy Sonic would realistically emit as someone who has that kind of speed on their side. I am doing all of these stages with my beloved Wii Remote on my beloved Wii U, by the way. Next up will be Dinosaur Jungle. Dinosaur Jungle is full of rocky pastures, raging rivers, spiky cacti, and dangerous wildlife. This stage is actually my least favorite of the bunch, but I still enjoy it quite a bit. I love the aesthetic of this stage. This section Sonic lands into after the river looks so cool, like what the frick, just look at it. Oh, it's so good. Every aspect of this stage just feels alive. Despite that though, Dinosaur Jungle feels as though it was just tossed into the box with the rest just to fill the space. I guess you can say what you want about why a jungle full of dinosaurs is the setting of a book based off of the Arabian Nights, which I still kind of question myself, but I mostly feel this way because the level interaction just feels lacking compared to the rest of the game. Definitely the least exciting stage for me. It felt like I didn't have to do nearly as much work compared to the other stages, but at the same time, it still felt somewhat tedious. And when it comes to those tedious aspects and the challenges that come boxed with them, I'd actually say this stage is easier than Sand Oasis, but Dinosaur Jungle can just be more annoying than anything. Most of that has to do with the level design surrounding areas with cacti and other obstacles. Dash panels being the main culprits, as they script you for a good second, not allowing movement to the left or right until it's done. It's not a huge deal, but it can be annoying if you're not paying attention to when the script ends and you run into something, or it may interfere with your judgment as to when you should tilt the Wii remote to get out of the way. Of course, Sonic going fast doesn't help, but that's just the bullet that has to be bitten because of having him fully decked out with skills. And that's just about it for the challenges, if you can call them that. They are very minor obstacles, but once you get the timing right, it's fine. Aside from all that, there is a little bit of tech you can use in this stage. This pot here can be kind of awkward to interact with because we usually do the homing attack to use it. But here you don't have a graceful window to do what you normally do because Sonic approaches this area too fast and there's also not enough room to begin with. You're likely to hit the wall and then have to back up, and backing up in this game is a very unfortunate thing to have to do. What I tend to do is start sliding at this spiral section and let go right at the pot. The homing attack can get you in the pot, but also just making contact with it while airborne or just after leaving the ground will secure your transition. Also, some barricades that look like necessary gauntlets can actually be bypassed. This isn't the only stage that this can be done in, of course. There are plenty of chances to do that with how OP Sonic is at this point. In this area, you don't have to wait for the dinosaur to destroy rocks here. The skill Splash Jump allows for a sort of parkouring over ledges that Sonic is just shy of overcoming. And this isn't really tech, but when you get Sonic moving this fast, as you'll see a lot of later on as well, you just straight up don't have to worry about certain sections of enemies. Like right here, there are supposed to be dinosaurs chasing you, but you're just already too far gone. All in all, Dinosaur Jungle is still a stage I really like. I've not really seen this take on a jungle theme in games I've played, so it's pretty cool to see. Next up is Evil Foundry, one of the harder stages for me, to be honest. Evil Foundry is a gigantic fiery furnace with plenty of spiked traps, cutting-edge machinery, and tricky contraptions dominating its corridors. I definitely love Evil Foundry, but boy, not only does this stage have some fancy tech to utilize, which we'll get into later, but also this stage was difficult to get a fancy rundown consistently. There are specifically two main obstacles that contributed to this struggle. One of those being this section where Sonic begins running up this wall that has platforms with spike cylinders rotating beneath them. The main thing to worry about here is being patient and precise, mostly because Sonic moves incredibly fast when scaling up this wall, which makes dodging these platforms harder to do since they aren't as easy to see coming. Get ahead of yourself and move too early, you'll hit the middle platform. Move too late, you'll hit one of the side platforms. Then you'll have to carefully readjust yourself to the side and back to the middle again to avoid getting hit or from careening off the side once you reach the top. It really takes practice and focus more than anything, especially after having had a bit more freedom to move however you'd like in the long hallway previous to this. The next struggle has to do with these narrow segments that consist of these metal compressors. These segments behave similarly to the one section I mentioned before in Sand Oasis. You have two ways of resetting yourself towards the ground from being in midair: the jump button and the brake button. Always use the brake button. Using the jump button in these sections can cause weird stuff to happen. I don't really know why this happens, but it probably has to do with the wonky detection and how it may clash with the purpose of actions that are linked to the jump button. Actions with the jump button are supposed to keep you moving, so that's the only reason I could think as to why the brake actually works in these areas, because it's meant to halt all movement. But it's not a big deal, as you can quickly alternate to charging a jump right after landing with a brake. Moving on to some of the tech in Evil Foundry, it may seem like you need to wait during these segments with the alternating doors, but you definitely don't. With some precise positioning, Sonic can slip right through them, and it's so satisfying to do so. With the first bunch of doors, I find this easier to pull off by homing attacking these two explosive canisters beforehand and then resetting towards the ground. This pretty much lands you towards the center of this room, and if you keep still for the most part, Sonic can get through. And if you continue to keep still after this zigzag in the hallway, you can slip through the second sets of doors as well. I also charge a jump and slide during the first set of doors just to negate the potential hitboxes from the spikes with the help of the Aegis slide skill. Speaking of Aegis Slide, I also use it through these spinning blades to keep up the pace during this section with the explosive canister chain segment as to not wait around for both canisters to finish blowing up, and with these spiked balls towards the end. Having a bit of speed beforehand definitely helps keep the momentum if you collide into one. Also, don't let the stage trick you into thinking you have to use every single circle contraption in this stage. That's just a lie. A well-timed homing attack can definitely get you through. All of these things that you can do makes Evil Foundry such a fun stage to play, especially when you can do it all without slowing down. It's definitely a difficult stage for consistent fancy runs, but it's so satisfying to overcome. Levitated Ruin is up next. After finally completing the stage, I set down my Wii remote and took the biggest sigh of relief that I've ever taken in my life. But what's next? The challenges, of course. Let me tell you a bit about them. Levitated Ruin is immersive and really fun, but don't let this stage's beauty distract you because you'll definitely want to pay attention to get past these obstacles. You'll really want to get back to sections that you mess up on, but the thing about Levitated Ruin is that the stage's length is a bit longer than usual, and the parts you're likely to have more trouble with come later in the stage. So this means that you'll have to get past the easier parts and the more brain-dead parts of the stage before catching back up. And I don't know about you, but I start to check out when my fingers already know what to do and I lose focus. And by the time I get back to where I was, I forget to check back in. So what can you do if that's an issue that you tend to have? For me, I kept repeating to myself in my head what I was doing at that very moment, even when using these circular contraptions. It may sound simple, but it definitely helped me keep focused when I needed to be. Next, I want to talk about this gate. The one thing you don't want is for things outside of your control to mess you up, but unfortunately this is a Sonic game, and for some reason they love rushing these games out the door. So you're bound to have to deal with them in one way or another. Something here keeps you lowered to the ground so that you can't jump, or it will rise you off the ground instead of registering it as a jump. I have no idea what this is, but what I found I could do was jump a little before this spot. But just make sure you pay attention to Sonic because this still throws off your footing, so you'll want to try resetting yourself. This isn't the only way you can do this, so you can also just experiment with it. The last challenge I wanted to go over is this wind gust section with the obstacles flying towards you after your first highway section. Of course, you're not going to want anything to hit you or slow you down, but there's just a lot that gets in your way here. You have to not get hit right here, not run into those, and oh yeah, not run into that either. And then you have to pick up your speed again if you decide you need to slow down, and still not get hit by these pillars. Goodness, it's a lot, but here's how I did it. I start out on the left side, so all I'd have to worry about was slightly readjusting back towards the middle. Then I charge to jump to gain a tad more control to then make sure I led myself to a safe zone. So then at least I could reset and continue through without getting hit by these pillars. Definitely one of the hardest parts for me to get through, but it was overcome with some practice. Now let's move on to some of the tech, because it's one thing to conquer a difficult stage, but to do so with flair is like the 3 cherries on top of the whipped cream. Splash jump makes a return to being a very helpful skill, especially during these gusty segments of the stage. Being able to hurdle over these pillars is like chef's kiss and is just so fun to do. We can also take advantage of the skill Cancel Burst in these areas, though the wind still fights you a little. When it comes to the rails in this game, we usually want nothing to do with them because they can just feel really janky, but in order to navigate them the way you'd like, you need to preemptively start holding the jump button before it will recognize that jumping is the action you want to take. It is something to get used to, but not anything too horrible. At times when you don't want to break the pace with a homing attack, just use the speed break instead. This may not come at much of a surprise that speed break destroys enemies, especially if you've played the boost games, because it just makes sense that it does that. This isn't a huge revelation by any means, but it's still an option available for when you want to try something a little different. And on the note of not breaking the pace, you may find it helpful to just let go of these ropes you hang on instead of shaking the Wii remote to make you swing. This is mostly because Sonic will target the next rope without needing to close the distance first. There's also the fact that acceleration to top speed is something Sonic is always passively doing unless you're braking, and the skill warp boost just accentuates that fact. And there we have it. The challenge against Levitated Ruin was taken, the challenge was overcome, and the ins and outs were learned. That was definitely the hardest stage for me thus far, but the thing about Sonic and the Secret Rings is that there's always another twist around the corner, and we'll see what form that twist takes in Pirate Storm. Like I mentioned before, Pirate Storm isn't the hardest stage compared to the one before this, and especially not the one after. But it has its own tricky elements that can catch you off guard, along with its quick pacing being a potential distraction from its secrets that let you avoid some of its otherwise mandatory segments or enemy gauntlets. Let's first talk about some of those tricky elements that I mentioned. Again, we have these narrow segments that are similar to what I mentioned before from Oasis and Evil Foundry, but this time, Pirate Storm's aesthetic naturally brings some uneven sway to the table regarding these platforms. Jump canceling to land with the jump button can lead to unpredictable movement since jump functions are still forward actions. So again, use the brake button to cancel your jump in these areas. And this isn't super relevant, but funnily enough, Shaw actually tells you to do this on narrow segments. This is actually super funny to me. Like, why did I unknowingly disregard how she was trying to teach me the game? I don't know, but at least we know now. Navigating those narrow segments are going to be the bigger things to keep in mind with Pirate Storm. That and the enemy placement in certain areas that clash with Sonic's speed. And those segments mostly call for a tad more patience on our part. Sometimes you just gotta be still. Like here with this enemy. Sonic's acceleration is just a little too much to deal with on these ships because it's a lot more narrow and crowded. So this enemy gave me a hard time to destroy smoothly because I end up behind it a lot of the time. But since jump canceling deals damage as well as performing a short hop or backflip with the skills Fire Gaze, Fire Tackle, and Fire Step, taking out this enemy even if you land behind it is possible without having to back up. Now with those covered, let's get on to some of the tech that can be utilized in Pirate Storm and some secrets related to the stage itself. Not being able to overcome a ledge because your jump wasn't aimed correctly can suck, and this is exactly why Splash Jump is like my best friend in this game. It's the little things in life. I don't think I'll ever get tired of using this move to skip platforming or enemy gauntlets. The great thing about it is that it can definitely be implemented in other ways that I didn't actually explore. I definitely want to see how others use Splash Jump throughout the other stages. And on top of that, I feel the same way about Aegis Slide. What could I do without you? Sonic just goes too fast, and that's a reason as to why we love him, but that can spell danger when sharp objects are looming all over the place. Of course, you could just jump over them, but sometimes you want to just keep up the pace. And I mean, what can I say? Sliding just looks cool. Now, when it comes to things specifically related to Pirate Storm, two big things come to mind. First is this spring that takes you past all of the bombarding cannonballs. The thing I like about Pirate Storm is that there is so much going on that it makes you feel that you need to get past where you are at that very point in time due to its fast-paced nature, as it has you going from dangerous moment to dangerous moment. And here is no exception. They put this spring off to the side where it could be missed because your gaze is guided towards the middle by these towering structures on each side, making this seemingly look like your only path forward. And you're already in the mood and moment to just keep moving forward because this stage hasn't shown you that it will give you downtime. So of course your instinct is to do just that. This stage never feels like a dull moment, which makes stuff like this hard to spot, but you're rewarded for exploring other options. The second thing I wanted to mention is this catapult. We've dealt with this catapult and others similar to it before, but we are under the impression that executing these actions too early leads to having used them incorrectly. But that's not always the case. Launching the catapult early actually grants you access to the button you need to open the next door without having to take the bottom path with enemies. And they tease you with the possibility of skipping the bottom path on 2 of the 3 ships you land on from a distance using rings. That's always been something that Sonic games have done up to this point, and it's nice to see here as well. Pirate Storm is definitely a keeper. I love every stage in this game, and the best parts are the different ways Sonic interacts with them based on his personality, and what you can have him do as you control him through these eye-catching environments and taking advantage of his skills to do so. But while I love every stage in this game, not every stage loves me, because Skeleton Dome takes no prisoners whatsoever. There's no getting around the fact that Skeleton Dome is very difficult. There are countless herds of enemies, a numerous amount of obstacles and traps, and many sections where precision with the Wii Remote is crucial. However, as you've just seen, it is doable, and not only is it doable, but it's doable to complete in a fancy manner as well. First, let's talk about how to overcome the challenges Skeleton Dome throws at you, and then we'll get into the personalized tactics you can use to complete this stage in your own way. As always, we have our beloved narrow segments that never fail their debut. These are the shakiest by far, but you'll gain a lot of control if you land with the brake button as compared to landing with the jump button. Weird things can still happen, like with this part where the floor is shaking. It negates my brake even though I landed with it, but it still left me with far more control to use my next action safely without careening off somewhere else entirely. I've mentioned the brake button, jump button thing a few times before, but it just bears repeating because you're using the jump button for most actions throughout the whole game, and it just becomes a habit. So remembering to switch how you land in these sections are important. If you want to jump or slide in these segments, just make sure it's when you've landed naturally or when you're already touching the ground. The next part I want to talk about is this hallway full of skeletons. You can blitz through here without having to engage a single enemy, but that calls for cleanup in the previous room to be done efficiently. When you're here, the skeletons in the hallway can start assembling themselves, so don't linger around when dealing with these 3 skeletons beforehand. Just hurry and unlock the switch for the door before the skeletons in the hallway can start attacking. The last challenge I think warrants a tad of discussion are these long hallways where you teleport through warp points upon reaching the end of the room. Precision is definitely necessary here, at least in the context for doing a challenge run, that is. I've had times where I've smacked right into warp points because I moved to the left or right too fast and ultimately lost control. The enemies and obstacles in your way definitely test you in this area because they are usually aligned right in the path you want to go. So you'll need to go around them and then line yourself back up with your chosen path. The good news is that you have the option to homing attack enemies to preemptively line yourself up with where you want to go, so that can definitely make things easier. When it comes to the tech you'll find great use of, Aegis Slide is going to be your very best friend in Skeleton Dome. You can use it to negate damage from the skeleton's attacks, the swinging hatchets, and spiked traps. And there are so many of them littered everywhere in Skeleton Dome, so it's just about where you personally want to make use of it. For me, I loved using it to slide through the enemies or spiked balls that orbit switches you need to activate in order to progress. It keeps up the pace and is so satisfying to do. I do believe that the pace at which you go through the stage determines what position the spiked balls are in, so keeping your runs consistent will likely make it easier to time your way through. I don't have any concrete proof about this, but from my experience, I noticed towards the beginning of my runs that I could slide through this last switch, but as I got faster at completing the stage, I would start taking damage from them as their positioning started to feel different. So I changed from sliding here to just jumping instead. There are so many ways to go about it though, so that's the beauty in it. I love Skeleton Dome, but goodness was it difficult. The toughest stage out of them all for me, but that doesn't make Night Palace any less of a charm of a stage. It has its own challenges to be sure, but at the same time, its strength lies in the impact it makes and is the cherry on top of this game as a whole. Now, to be honest, there's not much about Night Palace to cover. It's the final area of the game and ironically was the stage I had the least amount of attempts to get down. There are no real obstacles to tackle for players who've already mastered parts of the game previous to this. The only challenge is familiarizing yourself with the stage itself. But I don't think any of that is a bad thing. This is supposed to be an awesome and immersive spectacle with an insane build-up to the showdown against Eraser Jin. But if I had to name a few things, they would be the red smoke that drains your rings, getting the timing right for hitting the hourglasses, and getting these gosh darn rings on the magic carpet. The red smoke is only an issue when you're at a lower level and can't blitz through here as fast, and it's an issue when you get hit and have 0 rings. Some of the hourglasses are positioned after a scripted segment that takes control from the player, and with Sonic moving so fast, it can be hard to control what happens next. I assume that's why these bars are here to stop you, but Sonic does not care about said bars sometimes. And getting these rings is a gosh darn hurdle for me with the Wii Remote. It's definitely a nitpick, but not necessary for this kind of challenge. But it's my personal nitpick. Maybe it's better with normal controls. Let me know if these rings are easier to grab with a controller rather than with motion controls. Night Palace also doesn't have much in terms of tricks or alternate routes to take advantage of. The only things I could think of was the fact that you can skip this whole segment with the crazy amount of spiked balls falling down this staircase. And you have plenty of invisible rails you can use to get around, but that's about it. There are plenty of secrets to find, but not much that will take you off the beaten path because this stage is pretty linear. However, there's still enough variety to play this stage however you would like. Night Palace isn't a tough stage at all, but this stage is one of the biggest reasons as to why I love this game. It makes for such a very climactic final area of the game, and all of the stages before this one have their own charm and ambition. There's not much of a dull moment anywhere in this game. It's very cinematic and something is always happening or changing. I love this game. So that's why I wanted to no damage it, but also to incite discussion on how we can help each other play a treasured game of ours better. And that's pretty much it from me. Make sure to take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.